Ladies and gentlemen, it's Wednesday. We are DebateSensei. We got Matt Shapiro Esquire looking all
Hello.
All right. And then we got Tim CB, Visolutions. And then I am your communications professor, Jared Kubika Miller. All right, everybody. Why do you think the magazine's called Esquire? Does that mean lawyer? Well, it doesn't seem like they cover lawyer stuff.
Yeah, very little.
I think it means a lot of things. I mean, I think, I don't know. I don't know exactly
what does Esquire mean to you?
To me, it's like the culmination of so much work. That's what it means to me. But I mean, yeah, it also means like scribe, probably, or something, whatever that means. I don't know.
Like
Scribe.
a nerd that knows how to read and write?
Maybe. Or like I think of like a person who just sits next to like a king 500 years ago and just like scribbles down what they tell them to or something. I don't know exactly. Scribe.
All right. All right. I was just wondering about that. I don't know why that jumped into my head after all these weeks, but
we've got a big dumb topic tonight.
It's French.
The big messy world.
If it goes wrong, we'll just blame Tim because it was his idea.
That's fair. So we've got this world of new things happening. Like things are opening back up. Like last year at this time, I hadn't worn pants in months. You're right. Like I wore pants today. Kind of. It was weird. But like things are becoming Mr. Fan. Is that a tie?
They match and everything.
That's
Mr.
the whole
Rockefeller
suit.
Over here.
I have seen more of my friends and people just stand up and they're like, "You are not wearing the suit. You're just wearing the jacket and nice Laker shorts."
So now that we are becoming a little more normal, people are getting vaccinated. Like schools are planning on doing stuff back in person. We're now talking about in-person tournaments again, which is very exciting because I think everyone misses them desperately. Mad respect to Danny Cantrell and all the people that have figured out incredible solutions for online tournaments, but we still really miss the actual in-person nature of it. So as that's starting to happen, there's a lot of schools that are like very uncertain over whether or not the fall is going to happen, whether it's going to be online or not. Some schools are in person, but then tournaments maybe not. So something that I think could be very interesting, and I've heard some ideas kicked around, are hybrid tournaments, where it is both part online and part in person. What say you? Is that a good idea? Is it a terrible idea? How could what would that actually look like?
I'm sorry to answer a question with a question, but are there any examples of how that would be organized? Like I'm thinking like
I'm so glad you asked, Jared.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm going to reserve whether or not I like the idea before I like hear an example. So
I see kind of three options. So there's a synchronous and in-person. There's asynchronous and in-person. And then there's a great big mushy hybrid of all of them, which is honestly probably not all that much harder if you really think about it. So first off, let's start with the easy one, an asynchronous plus in-person. I don't think would be all that bad because you basically just host an asynchronous tournament, which lots of organizations have figured out. DebateSensei is one of them, but there's been lots of schools that have figured out asynchronous solutions. SpeechWire actually has like built-in software for asynchronous tournaments at this point. Like that's been figured out for the most part. So if you run that like a week up into the tournament happening, I've seen some tournaments that are hybrid, asynchronous and synchronous, still 100% online, but I've seen those happen where it's like, it's asynchronous rounds up until the weekend and then out rounds happen live, right? So I could envision that same thing happening, but with in person. So it could be, like a really small, solution where it's just asynchronous happens entirely independent. And then as many schools as are allowed to make it are allowed to attend in person. They would function as different patterns. So it would be like pattern A, pattern B, pattern C for debate, and then pattern D for asynchronous events. Asynchronous debate is still a little bit, something that we've talked about on here quite a bit. But then, so I think that one's fairly straightforward. So I guess before we move on, thoughts on that one?
Wait, so asynchronous in person, that means they go to their own campus and record the videos, or
no, like
a
traditional tournament, like how we normally run tournaments, plus an asynchronous tournament where like students submit videos.
Oh, they just do it on their own time. Okay.
Yeah.
Because I actually like the idea of like, one campus does a sort of like provides the studio and the equipment, and people come in and like you do this sort of this conveyor belt of video production where, and so the reason why that would seem appealing to me would be the competitive equity, because the surroundings are all exactly the same now. So it has nothing to do with video production, audio production, all that variable is taken out. But you might even have something like you get 2 takes or something like that as a rule. You know what I mean? Yeah.
I've always kind of considered, like, once the pandemic kind of hopefully cools down, like, completely, you know, the competitive equity part, we're talking about, you know, making sure everyone has the same equipment and gear and ability to create really high definition or high, you know, quality video. There's an aspect where I like the idea that schools have to kind of compete in that field as a school, meaning, like, I don't think the students at home should all have to be worried about this stuff. But I do like the idea that on campus, when students are allowed to, you know, commingle again and, you know, cough all over each other, they can go to like a studio essentially in your squad room, which, you know, your team uses. I mean, like it's kind of, you know, I'm sure at this point it's not in theory. A bunch of people have already started this and done this to some degree, but, you know, when we talk about purely online asynchronous events, whether they be the exact same kind that we're used to in a conventional tournament or not, on one hand, I see where Jared is right. I mean, I like the idea that, you know, we shouldn't be like trying to judge people on the equipment they have at their school. But once people can start using their school institutions again, it's cheaper to set up a studio in your squad room than it is to send 20 kids to nationals or something. Like there's this limit
if you
to where
saw like the quality of NFA and AFA competitors predominantly in the Midwest that were competing from their school. So like they had classrooms set up with like killer backdrops and lighting and audio and like video. Like it was well done. It was very impressive. And honestly, there was, I suppose you can say there's an element of like how you do anything is how you do everything. So the school that's going to put that much time and effort into it is probably going to put that much time and effort into their pieces. But even that aside, the students that had really high quality production tended to advance a lot further. Not like that was anything, but it played a role.
There's no question that I like, in my opinion, and I'm sure we're all, you know, different in our opinions, obviously, but I like the idea that this communication, competitive debate or speech events kind of start even getting the students mentally, you know, accustomed to using and seeing the importance of quality presentational, you know, communication in this form, because, you know, one thing that, you know, the pandemic will go away, but a lot of this is never going to go away, and it will get more pervasive and probably more economical and better quality. Like, but
sure,
I don't know. I like the idea of competitive equity, having everyone go to the same school to record a video. I also like the idea that schools are, you know, you got to bring it, and part of that is you know, getting attuned to the coming technologies and using them in a way to win.
What was the other way that you were talking about? That there would be a synchronous?
Yeah. So the second one, and this one gets, I think this is probably what people are more interested in because I haven't seen this one done as much. I have seen the first option where it was like just a separate pattern for video submission. I have seen that done, and I've seen it done actually fairly well at tournaments where it's just you submit one video, each one is judged one time, and that's, you know, the entire thing. Or you could shuffle it up if you wanted to, but that I could envision happening much more easily. But a live, an online and in-person synchronous tournament could be interesting, such that in-person competitors only compete with in-person competitors and online competitors only compete with online competitors. You probably have to do it in separate patterns, but you have all the judges on campus and you have enough space and Wi-Fi quality around campus for the judges that are there to judge either, hey, go to this classroom, here's your ballot, or, you know, e-ballot or whatever, since they don't do that on paper as much and probably will never will, or here's your link, go online and judge this, you know, video, just find a quiet space or some headphones or whatever, because for the most part, like, judges don't have to give any verbal feedback anyway, so it doesn't even have to be all that like super quiet as long as they've got
headphones. Could still give that feedback, I mean, remotely.
Sure. Yeah, so I can see that thing happening at the same time, where like a judge one round goes to a room to listen to competitors, and the next round is sitting quietly watching competitors online. I mean,
in Georgia, I mean that's
totally.
Sounds like award ceremony is going to get longer if that's the case. Yeah, I mean, it's like you have a whole other pattern, and like I wonder if people would be double entered. Like, would they be happening at the exact same time? Because can I be debating?
It's synchronous.
Yeah, can I debate live and then do my synchronous debate?
I mean, from what I understand Tim saying, I mean, it's exactly the conventional weekend tournament. It's just half the competitors are not in the building. I mean, that's right? Is that kind of what you're saying?
Yeah. So, I mean, that's if it were done with separate patterns. I mean, the problem with that is schools would probably see, we currently have figured out the synchronous online version, and it's way cheaper and way easier. So screw it. Let's just do that. So it may be the case that there's like 2 entries in person, but if it was all in the same, space, so maybe it was that students online are judged against students in person. So, this entry, the judge goes to their laptop and watches it, and the next entry they look up and it's a student in the classroom. So maybe that's, how it's done. They have to do a roll call, so they've got to have their laptop open for judging, which is, the status quo in person anyways for e-ballots. So they've got it open, and like 2 of the competitors on their 5-person roster are in the room sitting there ready to perform, and 3 of them are online. So the rest of the people in the class probably don't really get to watch, so don't really get to compete, participate in that way. But like for them, it's a status quo online, synchronous tournament, and for everyone else, it's just like a traditional. So I could see that happening. Like, I don't think that would be too bad, honestly.
I just shot down the cost. I mean, I don't think in reality that the cost of sending 20 kids to nationals is ever going to be compared to the cost of a camera and the experience that the students get. I mean, even in regular tournaments on the weekend and stuff. Those are memories, for instance, for me, and I'm sure both of you, like those are far beyond even debate, memories. Those are like friendships and you learn about so much about yourself and whatever, clothes, all this kind of stuff. And so I don't think there's ever a substitute. And we've never on this, tried to ignore that we're trying to get back to these things as soon as possible, despite how much they cost. It's worth the cost. But I do like the idea of when we just get completely lost in the conversation now, the thought that, you could go to a tournament someday and half the competitors, your own teammate isn't there, but you open your laptop up and you stick it on the podium and then they give their speech or something. It would be so crazy to see that. And I don't necessarily disagree. I don't think, as long as it's done right and the internet connections are all good, like, why wouldn't you, what's the problem? At some point, why are we fighting reality? But the conventional, go ahead.
So I think one of the things is like the schedule. Like I already think that the schedule is pretty jam packed with in-person tournaments, and so where are you going to add these? And so I'm liking the idea where this is kind of like where we're not adding it in so much as we're just adding a section to a pre-existing tournament. It would all be part of the same tournament. It almost makes sense that like campuses might team up, like instead of one campus hosting, 2 campuses would host. One would host the live portion and the other campus would host the online portion. You know what I mean? And so like the different tabbing rooms, and you can communicate with each other. They're like, so the tournament would happen in tandem. And I guess the market for that would be people who just can't afford to send people to tournaments.
That on that point, Jared, I mean, the one thing that you're kind of working on, and not an assumption, but the idea that your school has a very entrenched schedule from tradition. I mean, you've been around a while, and you have these tournaments
like a long time. Been around a while.
How long? I just mean, like, not everybody is in that position. So a school that for DebateSensei, for instance, we're really aiming to grow this activity in places that it doesn't exist now, who don't have necessarily a bunch of traditions, don't even know about the tournaments that certain schools have been going to every year, every planned weekend for years. And there's maybe room, for low budget, newer programs to like at least start, with a bunch of newly available online tournaments that are looking for, competitors looking for people who maybe aren't the straight up traditional, school who has been doing it for such a long time and has a director that knows exactly what they're going to do that year.
You know what? And that would make the award ceremony kind of awesome, because as long as they submit those videos like right when the tournament starts, you can throw together a little montage here and there, and like you could play it during awards. Like that would, I kind of like that. I really like that idea, where it's like this pandemic has made it so that we're catering to a whole new group of campuses. You know what I mean? It's like, and while like the solving the problem of travel expenses is just impossible. Like, I'm not smart enough
for a new team, especially, right? I mean,
but at least have participation and presence in the community somehow at a equity, much more cost. You know what I mean? It's like, but I think that you'd have to have a rule that you could only, because that's what I talked about before, Tim, you mentioned it. It's like you'd have to choose. I think as a campus, you'd have to choose one or the other, online or face-to-face. You know what I mean?
So I've seen it done, the asynchronous and in-person hybrid. So ACLA used to do this, and I loved it. They started what was called a communications arts festival, and so it was like, we're gonna celebrate communications more than just in-person. Here's a speech. So they had a writing component that students would submit written essays. And so that was pretty cool. And then those were judged, and there were awards for it. And then there was also submitted videos, and it was cool because students that couldn't go, I mean, realistically, tournaments can be really rough, especially for younger kids, like just on the schedule, and for college kids that have jobs and things. Like, there were a lot of tournaments that I missed because I was working. Like, you can't go for whatever reason, but you still want your piece to get feedback. You still want to be able to compete. You want to participate. So to that end, like, asynchronous provides a really cool option. Where I see, so I could see that happening, but where I see there being, I mean, really, Matt, you kind of brought it up, like a potential downside to it is, forget for a second the like additional communities that are included in it. I'm thinking about really like bloodthirsty admins. Any admins listening, we love you. Please don't cut our programs. But like teams that went
check out our stuff,
20, 30 programs or 20, 30 tournaments this year and spent like 5% of their budget. How much would that suck if admins are like, oh, well, good, you're able to operate without any of your expenses, so you just have to do forensics online. You're never going to tournaments again. Like, that would. I mean, I pray that doesn't happen. But think about the number of teams around the country that are axed every year, and I really don't want that to happen. And it still happens.
All the admins are as old.
I would hate for that to be like a replacement.
And they're all entrenched in tradition, and that's why they're all like, I want this Zoom crap out of here as soon as possible.
I mean,
I'm losing my mind. Yeah. No, I mean, I just mean, like, I hear you, and I like the idea. It's funny to me.
So I love that it is additional inclusion for schools that otherwise couldn't go, right?
Yes.
Like, to allow new programs to bring it in, or like, you don't have even just the geography for it. Like, so, I mean, every school that I know of went to, at least twice as many tournaments this year, right? Because it took no work. It took no budget. I mean, well, I shouldn't say it took no work. It took a lot of work on a lot of people's part. But it didn't take the traditional like facilities requests and like insurance things and scheduling and buses and transport and all that kind of stuff. It was so much simpler to participate in a tournament, so more tournaments happened. I can still see that being a thing. Like, I think that's what Danny's solving with the NOF, the National Online Forensics Festival. Like, that's super cool because he's going to have one of those a quarter, regardless of whether we're in person or online. Like, that's still going to happen. So I love that those things still exist, but I just think they could exist at the same time. So that third option that I was posing was like an in-person, synchronous, and asynchronous version. So you've got like, just throw all of them at it. That's just the hardest, but like
before we move too far off that last one.
Crowd.
Sorry, Tim.
Sorry, go ahead.
Before we go too far away, I was thinking one more before we get off of what we were just talking about. One way it also could come up with kind of more conventional style, or I guess the next one too. Low entry events. Like, let's say you throw a tournament and you only have 2 poetry or something like that. Now it's kind of like, well, if we at registration date, plus 5 days, we still only have 2 poetry events. Hey, I mean, you could throw it online and be like, we need, poetry entries from anywhere on earth, and now all of a sudden, or not, whatever, you could target. We could do whatever you want.
No, for real though, that's I know 100%.
And now the students not only, they get to practice, or they get to compete against hopefully other competitors and who knows? I mean, there's just that low entry event is something I think that might be really good for a hybrid tournament.
I'm smirking because I'm picturing like some badass kid from Bradley that's just like sitting in his dorm room, records one event, and like, I won 6 different tournaments this weekend from just submitting that.
That's actually a really good point. Like, yeah,
I mean,
like,
you could see it happening. Like really dominant speakers just like cleaning up across the country at the same time.
That's a room for software to come in and control when a video was recorded, because the thought that someone uses one video over and over and over is just against the spirit of everything I believe.
I mean, it's easy. You could just write it into the invite. You say the recording has to happen, has to have taken place between this date and this date.
But how do you enforce that? I mean, that
you can't.
You can't. I mean, unless you use some sort of software that forces you to record through it or something. That's what I'm trying to think of. Like, there are things that we don't necessarily see or think about because they don't necessarily exist yet. But there are ways to control that. It's just they don't exist. So right now, no, they don't.
I don't think that it's a bad thing that like one speech can win lots of tournaments at the same time. Like that just progresses the event, right? Like if you think about it, any given speech event, you bring the same speech to tournaments all year long.
No, but you have to rememorize it.
It's a new performance, right? But this is just like the perfect. It is this as opposed to the stage performance. It is the screen performance.
Yeah.
Like actors get however many shots to deliver that perfect version, and then they get awards for it. Versus like the Tonys that they have to like keep bringing the heat all the time.
But on the same note, people go and knock it out of the park on one tournament, and then they go to the next one and have a bad day. And I 100%. Think there's the well, this is definitely philosophical, and we can argue about, we could both be right. But I just mean to say, like, if you said there's not enough poetry students, so let's throw it online, and it was supposed to be live, like I would. That's the type of event where I would imagine I want you to basically do it, not necessarily live, but you did it for this tournament right here, and you didn't just upload what you memorized 6 months ago and don't remember a single word of now. Like that would be my fright, my fear, and students not doing the activity anymore.
If the submissions are happening all to the same place, like, you know what I mean, like the online tournament management software, then you could easily cross-reference. You know what I mean? It's like a person's name is attached to it, and there's like
file size, like
some impossible task to find out. Like there's only like 3 freaking online management tournaments. You can just have a way of talking to each other and just checking the file, and you could probably automate that pretty damn easily, because if it's the same damn file, you can tell like with just an easy check.
I also just still feel like good, like, so someone gets a really, really money take, elevate the event. Everyone else has the same capability.
I get that. I appreciate that.
I mean, like that's a different way of thinking about it too, where there's just this central repository, and then it's like you could just put up a new. I mean, it would be like best picture, and then at the very end of there has to be some cutoff though, where it's kind of like, all right, like we're only taking. It's like the freaking Oscars do it. We should be able to do it.
Well, I mean, your award ceremony would functionally be the Oscars plus the Tonys, because you have like, here are the people that performed and competed and like had to do it over and over, and then here are the people that like spent 1 million hours getting that one perfect take, right? Like getting all their lighting and audio and everything just right for the one thing. So I hear you that it definitely diverges from the traditional values that a tournament has of like, you've got to be consistent, you've got to bring the heat every time, you've got to show up every round and like read the room. So you never really can replicate those things.
Especially for those speech events, in my mind. I mean, a lot of, I guess, debaters memorize their speeches, but the memorization events, all the interpretation events and the platform events where these students like memorize, revise scripts like every week. That is such a huge component of that event in my mind. I mean, I didn't even necessarily compete in platforms, but I just mean to say that in my head, when I think of what work it takes to do those, it's like part of it is just, yes, part of it is performance and eloquence and word selection and content. Part of it is just this person has memorized 10 minutes worth of material and is probably editing it between weeks, and they just that's an amazing feat to me, and like that cannot go away. You know what I mean?
Oh no, and that
it won't go. Like it's not going away. Like that's why I like the idea.
I wish I could too.
I like the idea of like just think about it this way: each invitation now has an online section. You know what I mean? They're not
an online section.
If we don't treat it like a separate tournament, it's the same tournament. There's just the online option. You could either enter in person or you can
public option.
Online. Yeah, you know what I mean? And so that would mean that like per student, they would have to make a decision, like a forced choice is like you're either competing here or you're submitting it this way. And if each tournament has that, then you could kind of, it's like you're not adding anything in between the tournaments. You're just making the tournaments themselves bigger and richer and, like a lot more stuff going on there. You know what I mean? It's like, and so when people ask about forensics now, they're saying, well, there's this live portion and then there's this online portion and here's what you get with each one. And, like,
the possibilities are vast, right? Like there's no one thing we're talking about right now. And by the way, just to shout out to AlJ41, thank you for joining us and participating today.
What's up, man?
I think we all agree. Like one of the big, huge things is people will be able to hopefully compete in more events or make those rounds that they wouldn't have been able to because they're quadruple entered and this tournament's not going to allow it or whatever it is. I mean,
So Jared, what's the downside to having a student submit a video and also show up?
I agree, by the way, AlJ, just to rip you guys apart and ignore you. AlJ just said this may open the door to scared people. Yes, this might decrease.
No, straight up. Like I will
communication apprehension.
I stand behind that pretty strong. Like, yes, it is a goal of our activity to help students become more comfortable communicating in front of large groups. That said, this semester, especially, I think I've had the greatest percentage of students go from like completely terrified of giving a speech to competing in tournaments and like doing okay. Not like winning everything, but still like performing well, holding their own, finding their voice and getting confident with it. And
feeling good
because they were not as intimidated out of the activity by tournaments. Because tournaments are scary. Like if you have never done this, or even if you have done it, tournaments are scary. And so this really lowers the bar, especially if you get multiple takes. I think that's a really cool way to help like ease some students into it, to get them into it. So I like the idea of in-person and online as well.
They have to wear pants.
It just not
in the rules.
I'm coming from an access perspective, whereas if you're allowed to enter in two ways and some people can only enter one way, it's like, well, why don't we just make it so you just choose one way or the other, and therefore everyone has like the same amount of access. It's just, it's not completely equal, but I was thinking it was a bit more equitable that way.
Pro-choice.
It's like a really good speech. Somebody who has a really good and well-funded team probably has a lot of help with writing the script and then they get a whole bunch of practice at tournaments, and then that gives them the tools to really clean up with a recording. Somebody who is really wishes they could go to a tournament, it's like would be at a significant disadvantage. I think
the hybrid though,
it's worth exploring.
There's an aspect of hybrid debate too, where not even in formalized tournaments, where you can get more practice with people outside of your school. I mean, I've just noticed it on forums and Reddit or whatever. Like, there are just people seeking out other debaters, other speech, writers, all kinds of stuff that have nothing to do with their school. I'm guessing they're going back and using it at their school and competing. So, there's a whole world of like practice that you can get to kind of fight what you just started talking about, Jared. Kind of this inequality.
Some of the people who can't make it are like disabled, and then now it's like, it's like, all right, so like it seems like it would
quadriplegia
inherently, it would inherently favor people who are more able-bodied. And I like the idea of it's kind of like, all right, let's add a new component that is catering to a new group of people, not just to the same group of people.
That's
Yeah.
Grow.
Well, we do have
Right.
Discord. Yeah, that might be good. But we got our Twitch going too, so you could check us out there if you're not checking us out anywhere else. Let's take a
Thank
look.
you, LJ41.
Check us out on Twitch. Yeah, somebody stumbled upon us. Not bad, not bad. All right, we're hip to the jive.
Hey.
Yeah. All right, everybody. That's our time. All right. I think it was. You know what? It was not a bad discussion. It was. It was. I like where it could go, and I like the sort of critical issues that it brings up. Because, man, I didn't think about hybrid tournaments sort of along those lines until just now, and there might be a really good opportunity as long as we don't screw it up. You know what I mean? All right.
Now you sound like my dad.
All right. All right, everyone. Hey, that's our time. We'll catch you next week, okay? All right. See you later.
Take care.